Clymer, welcome to the podcast.
What's up? Thank you, my friend.
No problem.
All right. So, how's it going, buddy?
It's going okay.
Nice.
Yeah.
You got any questions for today?
I don't know. This isn't really an interview. More the idea is just to have a conversation. It's basically just a Joe Rogan Experience ripoff. But with just people that I know.
Interesting. So I have a question actually for
Okay.
you.
Okay.
What is the most positively correlated environment? Like a desert or a snow place? Like where do you want to be? Like what's your happy place?
So
what's a weird happy place?
What climate? I mean, I like all of them. I like snow. I like desert.
Just like one particular.
Tropics is a little bit overrated, but yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. Yeah, I like. I don't know. I think I see the allure of every different environment, like whether it be a city or some rural area or a temperate or desert or snowy or rainy. I don't like the rain. If it rains too much, that kind of sucks. But other than that, I'm pretty much, I can sort of see what I like everywhere. At least, like, if I have to live there, I would sort of like to be in a place that has a significant population, like sort of basically I'm saying a city.
City, right.
Yeah, a lot of, and it doesn't have to be Tokyo, it doesn't have to be like some just huge metropolis, but a place where there's like a lot of people, and thus there's like diversity in the people who are there, and etc.
So like, for me, I'm a very, I don't know if this is a common thing or not, but like I very associate positive memories with certain things. Like for an example, I like the sun, not because of the sun particularly, because I noticed that this was only more of a recent thing, where I like it really sunny when I exercise.
Okay.
But just because of cross country season, I loved it so much that like when it's sunny outside, it reminds me of cross country season. I feel like I'm there again.
Yeah, it's positive.
Right, positive
association.
But this is dangerous.
Okay.
Because I used to have, I was in a bad place in my life when I drove Green Valley Road a lot. Not Green Valley, Freedom Boulevard. And so I could take airport instead to get to the freeway from Monte Vista, where that's,
Yeah.
But because I had such a bad association with Green Valley and a good one with airport, I kept taking airport even though it's longer route.
So you're just burning gas.
Burning gas, dude. And then one day I was just like, I turned on to airport and I was like driving, and then like I felt like strongly like screw it, dude. Like you can't be controlled by these foolish factors here.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, time to man up.
You
So
just
I
gotta
turned around.
like dive into it.
That's right. Gotta stiff the spine.
Yeah,
Be
you're
steelish. Which brings up another question: can we control ourselves to the utter max? Can we like obviously, like physically speaking, we've seen that's definitely a common thing. Like, oh, I can control, like anyone can be a super fast runner. Well, I mean, genetics plays a part, but
Yeah.
you understand what I'm saying. Like anyone can become very talented physically, but I'm wondering more on the emotional spectrum. Like, to what point can we fully control our emotions?
This guy, it's sort of stretching, so you might just want to get a little closer to it, I guess.
Okay.
Just sort of hunch over and make your posture a little worse. Yeah. So to what extent can we control how we're feeling through discipline similar to like athletic discipline?
Right. Emotionally speaking.
I've definitely in the past been able to make myself feel bad. That's easy, as in
Why
like.
would you want to do that though?
Well, I've had my reasons, but I've psyched myself out to the point where if I've been able to drill something in by just like saying it to myself and telling it to myself, eventually I'll start to like believe it on a visceral level, even if it isn't true. And so I can definitely get myself into a negative state. As far as a positive state, there are things that I know I can do that can positively correlate to it, like you said. But it's not like, I'm not sure if I could just sit down and go, be happy, because that's just going to be a wild goose chase.
Right.
You're going to get discouraged. That's going to make you feel worse, and then it's just a repeating cycle.
Right. And ironically, actually, like when you try to control your emotions, sometimes like it goes the opposite, where you confuse yourself, like especially making yourself happy. Certainly, as Vladimir Lenin once said,
yes, comrade.
Yes, comrade. A lie told often enough becomes truth.
Yes.
Now, this is definitely true. I mean, we see it in like dialectical politics, but like we can also see it like in emotions for sure. Like you could tell yourself anything, and then you can make it true in your heart. But I don't know how effective that is on the opposite and the positive side, like what you're saying, like making yourself happy. I don't know. I've certainly tried that before. Like, just be happy, and like
just keep swimming.
Yeah, just keep swimming, and then like making those positive associations constantly. And it almost, what it does is it doesn't make you feel positive. It just destroys those positive associations. I feel like the right thing to do is like in fact, I don't think one should pursue emotion so strongly. Like I feel like that is a poor goal.
Yeah, I don't try. I very rarely do I think, darn it, I'm not happy. I need to be happy. Like you could say that I strive to do things and have goals that will indirectly make me happy, where the goal is something that, well, okay, why are you doing it? Obviously, we're just humans trying to satisfy our needs and our wants. And what is that other than making myself happy? But it's more common than you might think that people really place their mood as their primary goal, as opposed to a byproduct of their goals.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, it seems like there's something a little bit like almost selfish about thinking like, you know what, I'm not fulfilled in life. Like I just try to distract myself from all that, because you're just thinking about how you feel. No one cares about how you feel. People care about how they feel, and so you should work to make other people be selfishly happy as opposed to yourself.
Why should you do that?
Because, well, for one, as we just discussed, making yourself happy isn't necessarily like it just creates this repeating cycle of getting less and less happy, and it's uncertain whether or not you'll ever be able to just will yourself into fulfillment and happiness and contentment. For two, I just think that I just like the mindset more of thinking, you know what, screw me, I'm of course going to make a bunch of decisions that are selfish, but ultimately that's not my end goal, is to make myself happy. Even if it is actually my end goal, technically, I don't think that way.
Okay. That makes sense. That I agree with that. Yeah. Okay. I wonder what these core, because like we definitely have these core feelings, like what you said, you just like the idea more, right? Certain ideas definitely are more appealing to us, and definitely, obviously, whatever perspective you have on the origin of the universe and the origin of man certainly changes how you see that. But like for an example, Josh, who's probably on the show, right?
Yeah, he was the first one.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. He definitely has a perspective that like what was I saying again?
What? So it's how your perspective on the origin of the universe,
that's right,
the origin of man.
Right. And how that affects, what was it, emotions?
The way that you view the world and the lens by which you decide to have a mindset and make decisions.
Oh, right. These core ideas. Yeah. Josh has definitely core ideas that he says, he's like, oh, this is just a core idea, like morality. He says morality is a core idea. Like he doesn't believe in God, but he knows, like, you know, I choose to do this instead of this. I'm like, bro, why would you do that? Like that is decreasing your chemical pleasure high. And he's like, well, just because, I mean, he has no logical reason necessarily, but he's like, even though I'm sure you could find a logical reason, but like, he just says like, it's just a core idea. It's just, this is just part of me, who I am. And how does that come about? Like, obviously you could say evolution. But then I have a question about that actually.
Okay.
Certain things about the human body cannot be, and the human mind especially, cannot be described fully through evolution. Obviously evolution is logical in many ways, but I feel like there must be something more. Like, for example, why do humans have eyebrows?
I knew you were gonna say that.
Okay,
you talked about this on the bus to some tennis game or something.
Okay, yeah, and then why do we love the seeing the mountains? Like, these things don't make how does this come about?
I think that just because you can't find some reason doesn't mean that. So, for example, our hands, we have hands so that we can grab stuff. Eyebrows don't serve that obvious of a purpose.
Right.
My assumption is that we used to be hairier all over, and as we slowly shedded hair through the slow eventual natural selection process called evolution, it became more advantageous to have stuff to like block stuff out of our eyes, sort of like eyelashes.
But is that survival? Does that make such a evident difference on survival that you can like progress over other
I don't
species?
think it has to over millions or hundreds of thousands of years. I think it can just be a slight trend.
Well,
I think
it seems it must be significant in order for you to survive over other species. And if I had an extra finger on my hand, in nowadays society, evolution doesn't even apply because we all have our needs met. But let's just say back then, if you had the eyebrows, you had eyebrows, I didn't have eyebrows, we would survive just as long.
Yeah.
And the same for everyone. And since evolution works in populations, it won't make a difference.
But I think you're thinking of it as this like sweepstakes between everyone who has the trait and doesn't have the trait, everyone who has the trait and doesn't have the trait. Whereas it's more just this gradual process of change that it doesn't seem to me as though you necessarily have to have some intelligent designer to put things in that are useless. So my question to you is, why did the intelligent designer give us eyebrows?
That's a good question. Why did the intelligent designer make our bodies how he did? Why did he give us wrists? Why did he give us anything? Besides the useful functions, I mean, he just saw it was good and wanted to make it how he wanted to make it.
He just decided, I'm gonna. No, that kind of looks stupid. Let me see.
Maybe, I don't know. Why did he use carbon? Why didn't he use another?
Why isn't he a she?
Because he describes himself as a he.
Oh.
Yes. Because God made man and woman, like women.
WOMXN Wimkson.
But the male role on the beginning of creation is he made them. Not saying that women can't lead. Women certainly should lead. But he created the male role to be a leader and a someone who is responsible over his family, spiritually speaking, and in charge of keeping them spiritually strong. That is something he talks about in the Bible.
So you're deriving this from the creation story or from other places in the Bible?
Definitely the creation story. Honestly, the whole Bible, especially the law in the Old Testament, but even after in the New Testament, it definitely confirms what the law says. The law definitely, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, those books, Deuteronomy. They talk about the male's role and the female's role, and the New Testament talks about the same thing. And what you notice is it doesn't say the male is dominant to the female, which is definitely something that they believed at the time, of both Jesus' time and in the Old Testament, that the male was dominant to the female. But it says they are equal, but they have very different functions. So
separate but equal, basically.
Separate. But yes, there's. Thank you, Frank. Yes, exactly.
We need water fountains for each.
Yes, sir. I have a question.
Yeah.
What is modern segregation? What do you think is modern segregation?
Modern segregation, I think, well, if we look at demographics and we look at neighborhoods and populations, we see, at least in the United States, which is a very, on the whole, diverse country, there's a lot of segregation where people of the same, if
racially?
we're just going, racially. There's a
Okay.
lot of, not necessarily like the government is saying, all right, the blacks are over here, the Latinos are over here, but it's through a combination of actual segregation in the past still seeping
systemic
through.
stuff?
Yeah, systemic stuff,
Right.
and just the fact that a lot of, just for example, black people that during the Reconstruction era were not given the same rights and the same opportunities to progress and catch up to the previously free people, white people, and other more privileged groups. And I think that in a lot of ways, the effects of that are still seen in the average socioeconomic status of black people versus white people. Additionally, I think that our public
true.
school
I agree
system
100%.
really screws it up because of the fact that we've got public schools that are geographically assigned, where you go to the one where you live closest to, and the
Okay.
schools that do better get more funding. So that means that the rich public schools get better and better, while the poor public schools get worse and worse. And there's no way that you can really navigate that, because if you live in a poor area, you have to go to a poor public school.
Okay, so how would you assign it if you
Um,
were supposed to do it?
I
Because
would
commute
abolish.
is important too.
I would abolish public schools, and I would do
Wow.
vouchers. So basically, just have a bunch of private schools, and instead of everyone would still pay taxes for education. I think that's a good idea. But then everyone just gets a certain amount of money to pay for their schooling.
Okay, but like what we see with colleges is they're increasing the price constantly, or just slowly and constantly. Because they recognize that college is something that is seen as necessary in our society, in an American society now. Like you can't go without like in the olden times you could start work and you could do fine in many fields. You could start a trade, work on phone lines like my great grandpa did, and you could live your whole life like that, and it would be a useful skill. You'd make good money. But now you need a college degree for a lot of things, and so college is seen as necessary. Well, as a result, like a lot of colleges price gouge, as you probably have seen.
Yes.
And so I mean, you could totally do that at the smaller scale and just make it very expensive. What's the problem with that?
Well, so basically, what you're saying is that since education is a need, they'll just hike up their prices more and more.
Right.
Basically, what I'm saying is that through whatever means we can, we need to create more competition from school to school, because the monopolistic public school system, first of all, you can't fire teachers pretty much, and
Right,
that's
true.
a serious problem, because charter schools are doing great. I went to a charter school throughout elementary school, and like in a lot of really poor cities and neighborhoods, the charter schools that are popping up are really helping these underprivileged kids with educational attainment. And the reason is that they don't have to adhere to the curriculum that they're prescribed by the statewide public school system, but then they also don't have a lot of the, I don't want to say safety net, but a lot of the things that they have, like they can fire teachers. Teachers aren't just like tenured there and set for life and they get all the teachers unions benefits. They have to fend for themselves, because they're going to go under if they underperform.
True, but this brings up attention as well, though, because both my parents are teachers, as you know.
Yeah.
They've seen really, really, really bad teachers, like who didn't even show up to work and stuff, and like still got paid for a long time, like months at a time, crazy stuff like that. But like, I mean, at the same time, there's so many teacher positions needed, and teaching is just such a hard job. Like it's a torturous job. I can't believe they do it. Like, like it's just such a hard job. It requires a certain type of person, and there's not a bunch of people like that out there. So they just have to keep paying teachers more and more and give them more benefits. Like, but what do? What do you cut down their benefits? You cut down the teachers you have. Like, how do you work that?
So the issue is that we need so many teachers that bad teachers aren't necessarily bad, because it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see that, but I think it's hard to deny. If we want to go back to the start, obviously stop geographically assigning public schools. I think that it would be at least an improvement to radically change the way that we do public schooling, because the government has a monopoly on education with the public school system, and we're seeing the schools suffer for that.
Okay. And when you think the monopoly is a sufferance, are you referring to its curriculum or just the teacher issue, or
I mean, curriculum, teacher issue, all
Prizes?
the ways, yeah, all
Taxes?
the ways, yeah. Well, they spend a lot per student. Public school for the government is expensive.
Yeah.
True. And I just think the system is failing people who are not born into a strata of wealth to be able to get out of it and actually get a good education, whether that's through private school or more affluent public school.
That's fair. That's fair. I guess, I mean, I definitely learned about an AP government that like a school district in New York versus another school district in New York, both next to each other, could spend a difference of possibly 15 to 20,000 more on a student. I think it was per year, something ridiculous like that of a difference. And I totally think that that makes a big difference on a child's life, you know, especially on like the 3rd grade level to before. Mm-hmm. Like for me, like my 5th grade year was like super significant because if I didn't have the teacher who encouraged me in that year, mm-hmm. I would be a totally different kid. Like I actually thought academics were important because for my teacher's sake. Mm-hmm. And like that made a huge difference in my life, you know?
For sure. Yeah. I've certainly had teachers in the past who have, I look back and I think, you know what, my life would definitely be different without them and without their level of enthusiasm for the way that, like, there's nothing better than a teacher, which is not, and it's not like doctor or lawyer. It's not something that's considered like a good job in that sense. But if you do it right, it's super duper hard and it's incredibly commendable. Like a good teacher, they're not super easy to find, but when you find them, they're impacting the number of kids' lives that they're impacting is crazy.
Like Mr. Tar. I've
never had Mr. Tar.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I'm sure.
Amazing teacher. I have a Mr. Tar story. You want to hear it?
Sure.
Okay. So a little context for our viewers here. Mr. Tar is a math teacher at Monte Vista. Amazing guy. And the one time he started getting angry because I believe it was someone in our class, and he just kept asking the same question over and over again. And Mr. Tar was like kept answering the same way in such a sweet voice because Mr. Tar is so sweet. And then he like grabbed a ruler, like a meter stick, and then he like started hitting the table, and he's like, "Why don't you guys understand? Why don't you get it? Why don't you understand? This is math. It's so simple." Mm-hmm. And then he was like, "Oh my gosh, guys, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. What have I done?" Mm-hmm. That was just a funny moment. I just must admit, Mr. Tar
like lost control for about 3 seconds.
3 seconds.
He realized
he had a mental shame breakdown, dude.
It's like when Bilbo Baggins reaches for the ring in Fellowship of the Ring, and he gets all scared for a second. There's like, I'm sorry. Go, Frodo. Go forth.
I love Lord of the Rings, dude.
I like Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings is the best. You know, I was top 10 in California for trivia once at one time.
On that trivia app back in 8th grade?
That's right.
Heck yeah.
Yes, dude. I was top 3. I think. I don't know. I might be lying. I don't know. At one point. I don't remember. But you could ask me any question, Lord of the Rings, and I could give you the answer.
I'm not sure that I know enough about Lord of the Rings
to
ask hard enough questions.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I've never read... I read Fellowship, but I never continued. I loved The Hobbit. Mm-hmm. So of course I thought, well, like Lord of the Rings is bigger and better. I didn't really get into Lord of the Rings as much. I didn't like that the narrator was more omniscient. That took away some of the appeal of the story for me. And I don't know, maybe I was just like too young to really digest it. But I've seen the Fellowship. Yeah, I've seen the Fellowship movie, which is awesome.
Epic. Yeah.
Well, one of my favorite things, and they're off YouTube now because they got like hit with copyright violations, is the behind the scenes of that, and the special effects and the gigantic miniatures that they made for all the landscapes and all the stuff that Weta Workshop did for that movie.
Whoa!
It's, in my opinion, the high point of special effects ever. I think we've gotten worse now.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well,
I mean, compare the Lord of the Rings movies to the Hobbit movies. The Lord of the Rings movies, which were made, 10, 15 years before, look better.
Yeah. Honestly, yeah. It's true. I don't know which one had a bigger budget. Probably the Hobbits, honestly.
Yeah, I mean,
they came after the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, because it's a guaranteed quantity.
True. Dang. That is intense. Well, the Lord of the Rings series as a whole is pretty difficult to digest because of its reading level is so high. But the movies are so epic. I love the last part at the very end of the movies where Sam, he's like, Mr. Frodo, don't leave. And Frodo was like on the boat, and he's like he's going out and he's like leaving the Fellowship. In context for the viewers, they're just Frodo was trying to protect the rest of the Fellowship, who was trying to get to the mountain to throw the evil ring into because they were trying to get to the volcano. The volcano Mount Doom is the only place where the ring can be destroyed, and so Frodo is going away in the boat, and Sam, he wants to join Frodo, but Sam can't swim, and so he's like, Mr. Frodo, come back, and Frodo's like, oh Sam, no, I'm trying to protect you. Mm-hmm. And then Sam jumps in the water. He's like, come here, Mr. Frodo. And then he falls into the water, and he's about to die because he can't swim, right? Mm-hmm. And then Sam and then Frodo jumps into the water, grabbing onto the boat, and then he pulls Sam out, and they both barely survive, and then he pulls him into the boat, and they're just crying, and the music is playing, dude. Mm-hmm. I cry every time, dude. I get emotional there, dude. It's intense.
That's if you ever need to like cry on camera or
That's
something.
That's true. You
wait
just
3 hours till the end of Fellowship.
Yeah, probably longer than that. Probably like 3.5, 4 hours. It's a long movie.
Yep.
What's your favorite movie, Frank?
My favorite movie. I'm not sure that I have a favorite movie. Huh. I actually have seen very few movies. I'm not a movie watcher. So I almost feel like I'm not qualified to give an answer because like I've never seen The Godfather. I've never seen Citizen Kane. Yeah, I've never seen Chinatown. Me
neither.
Yeah, I can't. It's not that those movies are gonna be the best ones. You can think whatever you want, but I just don't have a very vast experience actually watching movies.
Okay. Well, okay. Better question. What's your favorite music genre?
Favorite music genre? I don't have a. That's a worse question. I don't like having a favorite music genre. The genre I feel like most at home in, like it's sort of like I can like recognize it and it's almost like comfortable to listen to is hip hop. But I don't prefer it over other genres.
Interesting. Music is music. Mm-hmm. All music is good, I guess. I love playing. I don't know. Definitely, instruments make a big difference, though. Like I love the guitar sound a lot more than the piano sound, for sure. Definitely, the piano comes down hard. I like in like really intense stuff, just really hard grand piano, like sounds epic. But like in most things, especially because I listen to like nice peaceful, relatively not that peaceful, but like just
75% peaceful
acoustic guitar kind of stuff. The stuff that's like cool, alternative kind of stuff.
White guy with acoustic guitar music. Heck yeah.
That's right. On the beach. And like I don't know, it's got a really nice sound to it. It's definitely different than the piano.
Just like from an aesthetic standpoint of the.
Yeah, well, just listening to it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know that the cello sounds definitely every instrument is. I wonder who came up with these instruments. I wonder who made them like first.
Well, it's a gradual progression, much certainly. Like evolution. Yeah. Somebody didn't just say, you know what would be a good instrument? You hit a key, and then through a series of levers, the softened hammer hits the 2 strings, and you've got 88 keys, and it's a piano. That didn't just happen. It was they had a harp or starting with a lyre or a harp, which is one of the most basic instruments you can make. All of your notes are a different string. They're different lengths. When you pluck it, it makes a different pitch. From there, people just came up with mechanisms for how to
slow down the time.
No, not slow down the time, but for how to hit the strings as opposed to just plucking them with your hand. And so you got the clavichord, which hits the strings, and then came the harpsichord, which plucks the strings, but it's got little buttons or keys on it. And eventually we get to the modern piano. So, and like similar thing with the guitar. A guitar is just putting a fretboard on a lyre, pretty much, so that you can have less strings but play more notes.
True. That's true. That's interesting. I learned something new today.
You learn something new every day.
I know.
Actually, January 28th, 2012, I didn't learn anything new. Really? I remember that day. I learned that you don't necessarily learn something new every day on that day, because I learned nothing new. Well, actually, I learned that on January 29th. On January 29th, the first thing I learned is that you don't necessarily learn something new every day, because in the 24 hours of January 28th, 2012, I learned nothing.
It's a sad story, man.
I know.
I learn Well, when it comes to knowledge, certainly I don't learn something new every day. Definitely not. I mean, if I could catalog those kind of things, then I would be a super genius. But I don't. I throw away lots of information.
You take it in, but it doesn't necessarily stay with you.
Right. Certainly. The emotional stuff stays, and that's why I think that's generally true of most people though too, is that it's just more memorable. You have more, like, you feel emotions, and when you feel something and it goes along with something you hear, like for example, that moment with Sam and Frodo. I remember it perfectly in my brain because it's an emotional moment. In the same way in life, you learn quicker and emotional. Well, you don't learn quicker, but it's more memorable, you know. It goes into your head. You learn a lot more things emotionally, day by day basis. That's why most humans just live emotionally, usually, actually. That's how we are made.
Yeah, the pursuit of knowledge is a little bit of a new invention.
Yeah, it's true. And I guess the question is it really that glorious? Is the pursuit of knowledge really even that good? I mean,
it's a good question.
Yeah, like, what does it leave us? I mean, certainly people aren't happier now that we have so much information out. Certainly the people who know the most in the world are certainly not the most content.
Well, but this is going right back to our thing about making yourself happy and contentment. People aren't necessarily happier now as far as their serotonin levels and whatnot, but we certainly do have a better quality of life now. We certainly are safer, less likely to suddenly die, more able to live a life. We have a greater opportunity to make ourselves happy, and that's the benefit of knowledge.
The guy from Braveheart, I forgot his name. What's his name? Do you?
William Wallace?
Not
Wallace's last name.
Yeah, it's William Wallace. That's right. I was thinking the guy from Amazing Grace. I forgot his name. William Wilbur something. I don't know. Wilberforce or something like that. But anyways, William Wallace, he once said, all men die.
All men die.
But not all men truly
not
live.
all men truly
live. For Scotland.
For Scotland.
No, but I mean, what you're saying is that, like, we have a higher quality of life. What is life? Like, what is this quality of life? Can life be quantified? And is it really resources that really matter? Who cares? Like, the rich people 100 years ago, I mean, even the rich people now, like, you sit around in a chair all day, you don't feel that great. You struggle with sleeping. You know, we like to feel like we have purpose. When I did my landscaping job, it was a good job, you know. I didn't make very much money. I came home dirty, filthy, you know. My quality of life was pretty low.
Your quality of life wasn't actually
well,
low,
it was
though.
Pretty high, actually, compared to the average. But compared to now, because now I work at Starbucks, I get free stuff all the time. And it's like, it's an easy job, it's social, you know. But it was fulfilling. It was certainly fulfilling. It was more fulfilling. Like, I felt certain peace about it that I didn't feel in other places, because I was a cog in a machine, and I was an irreplaceable bit, and it was fulfilling to finish a yard and, like, you know, make it look really nice, and just, like, at the end of the day, come home, you know, get some grub, hit the couch.
That's all well and good, but I'd argue that resources, for the most part, outside of certain extremes, make the average person's opportunity to have a fulfilling life higher. And
right.
I think that that's the good in pursuing knowledge, because knowledge leads to the ability to invent stuff and the ability to make the world a safer and more comfortable place where people are able to find fulfillment in ways that are even something like landscaping.
Right, where they can choose, I guess. Choose fulfillment. But the question is, what is good? Because if man is meant to work hard, if man is content by working hard, and we are given the choice to work, and we are more content working physically. Well, at least for me, okay, just personally. Now, if I was given the choice to work physically or work at Starbucks or landscape, I would work at Starbucks. Now, I do enjoy Starbucks more, probably. But, like, a physical or non-physical job, say they're the same in every way except there's a physical versus non-physical, I would certainly rather do the physical job. I mean, just because it's like harder work, but only because I've done the physical job. Now, if I was given the choice, would you like this physical or non-physical job, I would totally choose the non-physical job. So am I really making the better choices? Like, we have more choices now, but we always choose comfort. And comfort is not always the best thing for us.
We don't always choose comfort.
Often
We choose comfort, but here's the thing. First of all, I think that a certain amount of comfort is not necessarily bad.
Right. I agree.
And second of all, you're comparing it to a world in which you are restricted, and maybe the less comfortable option you have to do, and maybe you will benefit from it. But I don't think that it's better if you were to just like be God and place people in situations. Having a restricted situation is not the right thing to do for a person.
How so?
Because that's ultimately what we strive for, is the ability to do what we want.
To be free. Yes,
to be
but
free.
What if freedom? What is freedom? Because like freedom, I mean, freedom, as Plato once noted about freedom in democracy, he says, as democracy brings on freedom. Well, this is not verbatim, but this is the general idea that Plato mentions. I think I don't know. But he mentions, and Zeno mentions this in Zeno's Utopia. The ideas are that as freedom increases, as people have this more like these communities of like just like no boundaries, like you bring in anarchy, which brings in chaos, which brings in tyranny. Tyranny comes and replaces the anarchy, and it destroys our way of life, because the tyranny is because freedom is just we need boundaries. We need a healthy medium. So what is freedom? How do we get freedom?
So freedom, exactly like you said, a healthy medium. Mm-hmm. And my point ultimately is that the progression of technology and the progression of the gradual, every way that we measure quality of life, whatever that may be, but the way that we generally measure it, I'd argue is a pretty good way to have quality of life, even though people aren't necessarily happier or even more fulfilled now.
Well, then how is that pretty good? You know, like you said, it's pretty good.
So, but okay, like, it's tyranny to not have the tyranny of lack of opportunity that is worse. You can't honestly tell me that you'd rather live 300 years ago or like be a peasant or something. Exactly, because you're at the mercy of the world pretty much. You're not only at the mercy of rulers who in the past the governments have been were more restrictive and more tyrannical. But not only that, but just in general, you're gonna get sick because there's a lack of sanitation. You don't have the ability to climb as many ladders in life as we do now. And that's I think what we're ultimately trying to avoid is the tyranny of a world without our ability to grab the world and throttle it and do what we want with it.
I think we must be careful with this, actually. Because, I mean, if my life reflects anything of world history, my life, I look back at periods of time where I was like, and I think like, oh, that was bad. You know, that was a bad period of time. When I was going through that, it's not a big deal. You know, to me, it was bearable, you know? Mm-hmm. And, I mean, it's not true of everyone, you know? But it was just like, I feel like, and also in the same way that I don't want to be necessarily a rich person. If I was a rich person, I'd probably be like, no, I wouldn't want to throw away my riches, because you see the poor low, you know, you're like, you identify with those riches. In the same way, like, identify with oh, we have all these things, we must be happier, you know, because that's what we're told. But if we lived back then, would it, I mean, it might have been better. It's possible. I mean, it depends who you are, where you live, you know?
Sure, it might have been better for some people.
True, but not for everyone. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's
fair.
On average...
Yeah,
the mean betterness has been getting better, and
fair.
That comes back to what I think is that's probably more important than the few, or than like some people. If net happiness,
net happiness.
Here's the thing: that net happiness, I'm more a proponent, and I'm not sure to what extent this like comes from Josh or this comes from me. I'm for net happiness opportunity.
Okay,
your ability to have happiness.
And you want to explain that for the viewer a little bit?
Yeah, so Josiah's brother, our good friend Josh, for a long time, and still today, I don't even know what his stance on net happiness is now. I feel like he might have basically that it is what it sounds like, where when making a decision, you try to, for all parties involved, to add up all of the happiness that each decision would make, and then divide it by the number of people. and try to figure out how to make that number as high as possible to increase net happiness. So, for example, I could make a decision that makes me happy but screws you over, and that would maybe cause a zero-sum net happiness or maybe a negative net happiness. Maybe it makes you less happy. Maybe it makes you worse than it makes me better.
But can humans really operate in that way? Like there's a classic train example that we love.
Yes.
Where if I asked you right now, in fact, well, you're a unique individual, but if I asked a person on any, like an average person, I asked him, if there was one person on a train track and there was 10 people and they're lined up, they were like tied to the train track, and I saw the train coming and I had a lever to move to which one to go to.
And it's headed for the one person.
Yeah.
It's headed for the...
No, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
I mean, but like, and I could control, like, who is it to kill the one person or kill the 10? And you couldn't do anything else. You couldn't derail the train or anything like that. Then
I hate it when people do that. You ask them a hypothetical question and they come up with some loophole.
I would jump onto the tracks.
I would nuke the train before it gets there. No, I'm asking you the question to make it a more fun. I can make it abstract. Sure, I could say, is it better to save the lives of many for the sake of people who are in closer relation to you? Or I could give you a fun story about a train.
Yeah.
Just play along, dang it.
And then most people would say they would hit the one person, right? Because that makes sense. You kill less people.
It depends
but if you
on
say,
what race
if that
the people
person, they're all the same race. Okay. And you didn't know the race because their heads.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
they're
freaking Frank. Come on. And then it's like, what if that one person was your mom and she was screaming, "Help me, help me!" Like, people would say, I would probably kill the 10 people, and it's I possibly would do that too. Can we? That goes back to the question: how much can we control emotionally?
I like to say I'd kill my mom, but I'm not sure that I would.
Yeah.
It's like on paper, if you asked me this on a test, I'd say kill my mom, kill the one person for the sake of, because like these other people also have families and they also
right. They're all. What if
isolated.
Those 10 people are all 10? That's 10 mothers.
Yeah, exactly. But if you put me in that real life situation, honestly, I'm probably not strong enough to pull the lever. So whichever way it's headed for,
it's hey, there's a hypothetical case here, Frank. Nice. Well, I don't know. These things are complex emotions, but it goes back to worldview too, where they come from. Any good questions, Frank, that you have in your head right now?
I'm not sure that I have any good questions.
Because you don't have a good brain.
Oh.
I'm just kidding.
Dang it, this is my podcast, Josiah.
I was wondering I'm sure there's a lot of stuff out there, but like the science of humor. Like, I wonder if there's like, if humor has like a big science to it. Like,
dude, I've got a book. Hold on.
Okay. I know that like some people are more humorous than other people for sure. And like, I wonder if there's like, if you can become, I wonder if you could, read a book.
That's a good freaking question. Yes, my dad wrote a book called Mathematics and Humor that tries to create a mathematical model.
I wonder who wrote that book. Like
a mathematician.
Yeah,
it's
probably a guy who's like,
I would think.
I wish I had humor.
You need to be a comedian and a mathematician. That's what I said. It's like, he's like, Frank, you got to read this book. It'll teach you everything about humor. And I'm like, is the guy funny? And he's like, well, there are a couple of like funny jokes in there, but he didn't really write them himself. So he only has one half of the puzzle. In order to have mathematics and humor, you need to be funny and be a math. Like, I don't want to read mathematics and humor by someone who's just funny.
Well, I wouldn't. Honestly, I wouldn't mind. You can't learn these. Like, you can't say, "Oh, how to be funny" by someone who's not funny.
No, I want to. Well, here's the thing. If I got a lot funnier, I think it would be really interesting to write a book about like just like how to be funny. The title's like How to Be Funny in parentheses. No, seriously, even if you're not funny, you can become funny with this book, because it's one of the things where not only does it seem to just generally be like just a natural trait, it goes back to people are obsessed with eugenics. Where in the same way now,
explain that one for me, Frank.
So okay, hear me out, right?
And viewer, eugenics is where you control genetics.
Yes. Stupid people don't know what eugenics are. The lowly viewers watching our intellectual discussion need to be taught. No, so the classic example for me is singing and vocal technique, where there's nothing that drives me more mad than when people are like, wow, that singer blank, but he was really good. He's clearly such a natural talent, or blah, blah, when they love it. People love it when people naturally have a good singing voice or are good singers. Which makes no sense. Because if you're naturally good at it, that means that you didn't have to work hard to get there. It's not cathartic. For someone who has no natural singing talent whatsoever, it really there's no catharsis in someone who's good at singing. That's like a tall person playing basketball versus a short person, and the tall person wins, and everyone's like, yay! He's naturally talented. No, you're rooting for the short person, right? You want the person who is less naturally gifted in something to be able to overcome their obstacles.
Well, we just like gifted people, okay? Even if we can't even relate to them, like depressed geniuses. We love depressed geniuses. Man loves depressed geniuses.
Here's the thing. I think I'm a little bit unique in that I hate talented people. But people in general.
Oh, so you hate me, Frank? I'm just kidding.
A little bit. No. So the like the even worse example. Now, of course, if you sit people down and tell them your brutal story of how you picked yourself up by the bootstraps and became a good singer through brute force and through learning how to do it, then maybe they'll sympathize with you and they'll think it's cool. But I just feel like you really can't get around not being naturally funny.
Well, what's okay? Going back to the funny question.
Yeah, the whole singing tangent was to wrap it back around to the funny question.
Good call.
The reason is that, let's just say someone's being funny. Someone like kills on the stand-up stage, or a better example is just naturally funny. You're having a conversation with them and a couple other people, and they're just their comments are always hilarious. Doesn't it sort of shatter the illusion? It's like seeing how the sausage is made if you find out that they used to be just the most unfunny person ever, and then they just sat themselves down, looked up on the internet how to be funny, and like worked and overanalyzed themselves every single time they weren't funny. Because humor inherently, this is what I think it is. Humor inherently is a positive mode of entertainment, right? So like drama, if you're just watching a movie, it could make you happy or it could make you sad, and both of those are equally valid emotional experiences to get out of a movie or a book or something, but it's supposed to take you somewhere. Humor, pretty much by definition, because it's fun to laugh, it's fun to hear funny stuff and be funny, is one that brings positive emotion. And I think that if people realize how not fun it is to not be naturally funny and constantly have to like think about it and constantly have to be crafting the jokes in your head, it's way funnier for people to just blurt something out without much thought going into it that's naturally hilarious, because that person's having more fun doing it. Thus, everyone else is having more fun. If the person being funny isn't having fun being funny, then it becomes less of a shared positive experience.
Well, I would know in my personal experience that I mean, that has a lot to do with just you not being very, like, people like when you're very comfortable. Like when you feel comfortable, like other people feel comfortable too. Yeah. And like that's definitely a really big
part. It's like yawning.
Yeah, exactly. It's very contagious. Yeah, it's being comfortable. And so like if you're less self-conscious, like that could be definitely a piece in a book, couldn't it? Like, don't worry about what other people care. Like,
yeah, but okay. Here's what I'll say to that: if you bought a book on how to be funny, then obviously you care what people think about you. True. That's the problem with all of these like how to be a more socially viable person, like how to be more charismatic, and like the first thing. All right, so you clicked on this video, right? And now, dear viewer, you have to not care about what people think about you. Well, you're asking the wrong demographic to not care.
Yeah.
I want this information because I care deeply about what people think.
Unnaturally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dang.
And so that's
I didn't even think about that.
Part of the paradox of trying to become funny, which like is something that fascinates me, because like you said at the beginning of this podcast, you can get stronger if you lift weights and you exercise and you have the right diet. Anyone can pretty much, unless you're like paralyzed from the waist down, can get stronger.
Yeah.
But because the path to it is doesn't contradict itself. Whereas in a lot of ways, I think that, and this even winds back to singing, because if you're more comfortable when you're singing, then you're going to be more relaxed. You're going to be able to create a more pleasing tone. When you're plunging yourself into discomfort to get better at something that has comfort inherently tied to it, I think it becomes a lot more. It becomes a lot more of like that's just down to natural talent.
Well, see, that's what's interesting. There's also these core drives, motivations, right? Mm-hmm. And it's weird how some motivations certainly affect other things. Like, the motivation is important, as you're saying, like lifting weights. If your motivation, like, if you're not, not lifting weights is not the right example. Like getting better socially. If your motivation is because you care so much about how other people think about you, then you're probably gonna fail at that because you're uncomfortable with trying to be comfortable.
Yeah.
You know. So it's like you have to have a different motivation, and that's why it's certainly very paradoxical sometimes, like with certain things. And I've noticed that when I like in things that I've read, like or things that are just wise. Like you could take not, I don't know, what's a good example that's appropriate. Okay,
you don't have to be appropriate on this podcast.
Oh, all right. Well, I won't.
But do whatever example you feel comfortable.
Well,
with.
let's just say like sex before marriage. Okay. All right. This is not that. Okay.
Yeah. This is a family program. No,
family for all the family.
I don't care about getting demonetized. My entire YouTube career, I've made 2 cents.
Wow.
I've monetized my YouTube channel not because I wanted money, but because I wanted custom thumbnails. And after years of YouTube, thousands upon thousands of views, I've made 2 cents.
Well done, my friend. So sex before marriage.
Yeah.
What was I even saying, Frank?
About comfort, motivation.
Yeah, motivation. Right. Paradoxical. How things are paradoxical with motivation. Mm-hmm. So you'd think like sex before marriage, not like it shouldn't affect things too much. Like it should be not a big deal. But we found, like, as we study it more scientifically, paradoxically speaking, like what the like more ancient things like the Bible say, like sex before marriage is wrong. Just looking at a natural stand for it, naturally I'd be like, dude, why would it be wrong? Like, like just naturally, like just being honest. But like, science kind of backs it up as we see more and more because like of just like all the different emotional factors that go into it. And so in the same way, like what we notice is certain things that like that you say, do this for this motivation. Like for example, work hard for God and not for man. It's like, well, that wouldn't seem like that would be like that productive, but like in the end you find that you are better at doing that by following that, Do you understand what I'm saying, kind of?
So what's your source for the scientifically?
Okay, well, there's certain things. I admit I do not have a source for you here, but I can be more specific if you like me to. Would you like me to be more specific?
Yeah.
Okay. For example, if you have relations with someone, that individual, you are most chemically bonded with them. There's certainly a chemical bond.
So I remember you saying that.
Of course, right? Yeah.
And that.
I can finish with a review.
No, go
okay. And that bond decreases the more that occurs with different partners. So if you have different partners, the bond decreases more and more, and it never comes back. That bond never comes back. That first person for life will always be the strongest chemical bond, and that's something that shows that it should be for marriage, like the first person, only person, wife and marriage.
That's all good. That would be true if it weren't for the fact that it's completely false.
Okay.
I remember you saying that.
Yes.
Josh said the same thing.
Okay. Did you like research it and find out it's not true?
I did research.
Oh, okay.
I tried to find, first thing I did was I just Google search termed every single different way I could phrase your first sexual partner is the strongest bond between the person.
You looked that up on the internet?
Yeah, I looked it up on the internet, and I didn't even go on private browser. I looked it up because it's for science.
Okay.
I found nothing. I looked through every single source I could. I went to the second page of Google search results, the third page, like where it goes Google, like the Badlands, you know what I'm saying? And I found like it's called like God, what the heck is it? Like the Trumpet or something. It's some Catholic publication, had an article that fit with my search terms, but it never made any sort of mention about the first bond is chemically the strongest. All it did is it basically said that like hookup culture and casual sex is bad for X and X reason. But you think if that's their point, and if they're an overtly Christian publication, they would probably want to mention their smoking gun of the latest scientific research. I found a website that was obviously a Christian think tank that had an article that had statistics where you see a negative correlation between the sustainability of a marriage and the amount of partners you've had before that marriage, right? Mm-hmm. Which I've heard things about like those types of statistics that they're not necessarily reliable, and for me correlation doesn't equal causation, but you know what, fine, that's a solid piece of evidence. Not once, I read the whole thing, did they mention the first chemical bond is the strongest. So I looked up which chemicals actually affect how does this actually work physiologically in our neurochemistry. The first bond is the strongest, at least from you and I's perspective, is impossible, because the quote unquote the monogamy drug or the love drug is called oxytocin. If you dose someone up with oxytocin and they're in a relationship, they're going to be less attracted to other people and more attracted to their partner, right? Right. Men don't release enough oxytocin upon orgasm to actually affect their behavior, because there is a little bit of oxytocin and a little bit of testosterone. Testosterone has the opposite effect of oxytocin. It makes you less monogamous. And so the two actually cancel each other out, and it's an insignificant amount. Women do release a significant amount of oxytocin upon orgasm, which is why after sex they'll feel more of just like a bond with their partner. And this is why women often feel like they can't handle casual sex the way that males feel like they can. But I could not find, and I read the abstracts of scientific studies. Some of them were like behind paywalls and stuff. I looked through, I could not find anything to suggest that the effect of oxytocin diminishes over time with continued partners. Okay. It's just not true.
Yeah, I will say I got that statistic from my youth pastor who told me. So I don't know.
That's the thing. The only people who say this are
Christians.
Exactly.
Right?
And it's not even that they're all Christians, because I looked through Christian websites. Mm-hmm. It's like this small group of like, and that's what Josh said, is like, well, blank person told me and blank person told me and blank person told me.
I definitely should do some more research on that. I admit I have never looked it up myself. I would like to. I do believe that we should find credible sources, but yeah.
My personal theory is that someone just made it up.
Really?
I think that someone just pulled it out of their ass, but I'm not sure. It could have been some sort of like miscommunication.
Just that there's anything that happens at a physical level with
that after, because like men do release oxytocin, but they do it through just normal human interaction.
Wouldn't you agree with me that sexual faithfulness is pretty essential?
You're saying that cheating is bad? I absolutely think cheating is bad. So what's your point?
It makes it certainly more difficult to have, well, I mean, you can even think about a logical standpoint. It makes it more difficult to have a faithful relationship with someone
if you've had previous partners.
Right.
Why?
Well, because you can compare other people. It's like,
what are you comparing?
Okay,
you know what? Rachel's pussy is tighter than Annika's pussy.
Hey,
okay,
wait,
vagina is tighter. Ugh, you know what?
Stop,
and
Frank.
it just feels better. What? No. I know you're gonna tell me to stop because I'm being all explicit and stuff.
Okay.
But here's my question:
right.
What are you comparing? Tell me.
Okay, so I've talked to a lot of married men. Mm-hmm. Okay. Because I definitely want to have integrity in this.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's some married men I've talked to who have less who have told me that they did mess up a lot before they got married, that they didn't have the same sexual integrity, and as a result it has slightly hurt their marriage because like married men, they don't know anything different, and it is certainly much more difficult to have an affair because it's much more frightening because know nothing different.
There's a lot more curiosity though. Like wouldn't like now we are two people who have never had sex,
True. That's
who
a
have
good
never
point.
been married, and
We
we're sitting
can't
here
speculate too much.
we're sitting here thinking like, what would it be like? And I don't think that there's any reason to think that comparing previous partners, because we're not, obviously, I would hope your position is that it's okay to have multiple romantic partners because you're not gonna just hit a bullseye on the first try, right? Throughout your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, not completely removed. Like, no, like you wait for sex you wait until marriage for sex, but before then, you can
Okay.
date
Oh,
other people, right?
okay. Yeah.
So we're not comparing things about the relationship. We are comparing things about sex. To me, that doesn't seem like any less of an issue than the hypothetical comparison that you've had of like, well, not having anything else, and how would that feel? Neither of which could be true, both of which could be true and valid concerns for people. I don't know, but I don't see why you would place one above the other.
Well, because from those I've heard, they never say they have curiosity. They definitely, the ones
They
who
probably wouldn't
did
tell you
screw
that
up.
because they...
Yeah, well, I've read some pretty, I mean, the book Every Young Man's Battle is pretty explicit.
Every young man's battle.
Young
were
man's
playing
battle.
tennis,
Yeah.
and I couldn't resist. It was like the book was like face planted on the bleachers, and I was on exhibition. I wasn't playing, and I couldn't resist. I'm like, I've got to read this freaking book. This is gonna be hilarious. And
do you agree with me then about its nature of its explicit nature?
Yeah, I read.
They don't hold anything
I read
back.
reviews on Amazon that were pretty funny.
Seriously?
It's too. It was like, I bought this for my fiance, and it made him relapse because it triggered sexual stimuli. Don't buy this book.
Oh my gosh.
And,
Actually, yeah, that one I don't like as much as Every Man's Battle, because I know it is too explicit.
No, but I skimmed through the book. I looked for, first of all, it doesn't have any citations besides the Bible, and then I read this is all I have to say about the book, and then I read the section about homosexuality, and I thought that was pretty funny.
I've never read that section, actually. I've read the book 7 times, but I've never read that
Yeah, I
section.
skipped this, like, it doesn't apply to me.
Yeah.
Never will apply to me, obviously.
Yeah, I skip every time. But I mean, the book doesn't hold anything back, and it's never talked about that. It's talked about everything, every single, thing on sexual integrity that I can think of. So I don't know. And I'm talking about Every Man's Battle with that. Oh, just like
we got off on a
curiosity.
What were we talking about?
If curiosity outweighs the other, but I don't know.
But my ultimate point is that I, for the record, don't think it's all that bad of an idea to wait until marriage. I don't think that by doing that you're screwing yourself over. I do think that by instilling fear in yourself or other people, that you better get it right on the first try, because once you do it, once you're locked in, when there's no actual scientific documentation for that leads people to live in a state of fear that I don't think.
Okay, well, okay. I don't think fear should be a primary. As we talk about motivations, I think you got to be careful with motivations too, because fear leads to legalism, and
anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
But fear definitely leads to legalism, where you're just following rules. And actually, when you have legalism, you generally mess up a lot more often. But if you're have the motivation of more like, where in my context, I want integrity for the sake of God, because I love God, because I have a relationship with God, and because even though I don't know her yet, I love my future wife. And I don't want...
She might be like a terrible person. You never know.
I love her anyways, because the moment I say I do, I have to... And I don't want these things to be rotting out my future marriage. And so I think it is important, and in those motivations, to uphold those positive things. And definitely when you travel... It was said this way in Every Young Man's Battle. When you go travel the freeway of premarital sex... you can't go back again. You can't make a Yui. Like,
why though? Because
it was said that once this way by his older sister's boyfriend once told him, when you taste the candy, then you can't resist anymore. So never taste it. So he said never taste it. So it makes it more difficult to resist when you end up going into it. That's true of a lot of things. If you never try drugs, you never struggle, because you never try it.
Yeah.
So it's not difficult. In the same way, I mean, sexual things I would say very similar in regard
in
to
this
addiction.
situation, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm never going to try drugs until I commit to only cocaine. I'll never do meth. I'll never do heroin. Only cocaine. And I've got to wait until I'm ready to make that commitment. Or maybe I'll make a commitment to meth. Maybe I'll make a commitment to oxytocin. I don't know. Oxycontin. I'm screwing up my oxys. And you could make it. That's what you're doing.
Hey,
make
exactly.
A
Right.
oxytocin.
That's
But I don't really think that it works that way, because ultimately, in your if we take the drug metaphor, because I think it's a little bit of a better metaphor than candy, you're still gonna do a drug at some point. Whereas I don't ever plan on doing. Now, of course, I drank black tea today, so I just did caffeine. But if we'd say like drugs in the sense of psychoactive drugs that are like drugs, for lack of a better definition, I deeply apologize. I don't plan on ever doing it. Right. Whereas you plan on doing drugs.
I do not.
Yeah, no. So in our metaphorically, you plan on doing drugs, but only in one specific situation. So I think that having sex is more or less. Now, of course, here I am running my mouth about going to the moon. It's not like some completely different thing. Having sex before marriage and having sex after marriage aren't two completely different things, and now you're addicted to sex before marriage, whereas if you do it after marriage, now you're addicted to sex after marriage. It's not two different things. It's the same thing, but in a slightly different context.
Not in my view, because like I believe that God designed sex to be okay, like is good in marriage with your wife, but like it's a good thing. You can be addicted to sex in marriage. That is good.
Yeah.
God,
exactly.
But then before marriage, it's not good.
But I think you're just addicted to sex and you happen to be married, which is good. But what? So like, what's the difference?
Well, I mean, one thing is that you have a covenant when you're married. Yeah. That person.
Yeah. You happen to be married.
You make the assumption that person you're going to be with for life.
Yeah.
Whereas not married, I mean, it's not the same thing. I mean,
but how does that change?
Marriage is a covenant.
I'm sorry if we're getting too X-rated. We're not going to get too X-rated, but how does that change the sex is what I'm saying. How does that change the actual act and the way that it affects you?
Physically?
Not
emotionally?
Physically, emotionally,
well,
physiologically.
I think it goes definitely back to different partners. Like so we can make a hypothetical case here of someone who was, engaged, okay? And they were like, they're struggling with it. They messed up. Okay. And they started, and they know they were going to get married.
Yeah.
But the problem is you never know, because like there's so many stories. In fact, there was one from my old church, and I'll use different names here.
Okay. This is my favorite thing ever to do, by the way, is make up fake names when you're telling a story, because you can name the people whatever you want.
That's right.
It's like writing a book without having to be creative with anything besides. That's the most fun part. Is just coming up with a name. Sorry.
I'll use Lord of the Rings characters. Names here. So
all right, here we go. You're gonna ship Frodo and Sam finally. They're gonna get together. Well, that's what we were thinking the whole movie. Is when are these people? When are these two lover boys just gonna finally admit their feelings for each other? So I'm glad that your fan fiction is finally achieving that.
No.
So what? So yeah.
No.
So Frodo.
So we'll go with Aragorn and Arwen. Okay. So
right.
Aragorn and Arwen, they're engaged to get married, and they mess up. They make a mistake, and they do stuff before marriage. Oh no. Okay. This is a hypothetical case that actually happened. So. They're at my church. Aragorn and Arwen, they're at my church. Okay. And they're engaged and they're about to get married, and they want to hold off. But see, Aragorn put too much pressure on Arwen, and they ended up messing up. They ended up doing stuff that they didn't want to do.
Okay.
And that screwed him up, and it hit him hard. And he began to just like the way, like, he didn't think pornography was wrong. He began to he was just I don't know, it definitely hit him hard, and he wasn't the same man. He changed a lot, and so she couldn't marry him. She just was like, I can't believe that I gave this guy myself over to this guy. So she ended up dumping him, and then he ended up like doing stuff with a bunch of other people, and it was just a big old mess. And it was like, he was eventually excommunicated from our church because like there was like rape involved, crazy stuff, dude.
So Sauron and Sauron are chilling,
Stop.
and Sauron's like, "Hey, Saruman,
Stop.
I got some weed."
Uh-huh.
And Sauron's like, "No, dude, I don't want to do. I don't want to. Oh, you know what? It's just weed. You know what? Sure." And so Sauron takes some of the marijuana. He smokes some weed, and he feels good. He enjoys the experience. You know, it
Sorry,
works for him.
viewers, for the explicit nature of this.
Then Sauron decides, you know what? I just tried weed. You know what? I think I'm just gonna do a little bit of coke. You know, just like a key bump, not a line, a little key bump. You know. And that's also fun. And then he thinks, you know what? I'm just going to do full-on lines. And, ooh, there's this thing called crystal meth. I'll do it in heroin. And then he dies because he overdoses on heroin. Don't do drugs, kids. The real cost. You see how that's one situation that illustrates
a bad situation because marijuana is not a drug that's very addictive.
Yeah,
so that's a bad case. Whereas
fallacy.
It's like if he started on heroin, your heroin addicts are more likely to die before they get off heroin.
Yes.
So I mean, if he started on heroin, that's a bad idea. I'm not saying it's progressive like that. I'm saying no. You start off with the big old thing, dude.
Yeah, but it's not. Yeah, but
sex before marriage is not different than sex before marriage later on. I mean, it's the same. It's the same heroin,
and sex after marriage, which is sex later on. It's all the same thing.
Well, it is different because you have a covenant. You have a. I mean, it's not even speaking from a spiritual standpoint. I'm gonna just take out this whole spiritual lens from it. Not even like. I mean, obviously, I believe in that God tells us to do it in marriage. This is different. I'm gonna just speak from like a very humanly perspective here. Like, there's a covenant in marriage. You make the assumption that you're going to follow the right thing in the second aspect, that you're going to stay with the person you married. You're not going to cheat, right? If you follow with this, then that one person you have relations with, you're going to go in throughout all your life. It's like you can be addicted to having sex with them, okay? But outside of marriage, as I said, like before, you don't know. You will likely, if you travel down that road, you'll likely have many, many different partners, and it really affects you emotionally. I'm not even speaking from a spiritual standpoint of at the distance from God and stuff like that, but like it affects you emotionally speaking. I've known people who it just destroyed like emotionally because of different partners that they had. And people who committed suicide. I've known people who've committed suicide after breaking a relationship that was sexual.
A couple things.
Okay.
Aragorn got depressed and all mad at himself and had all these issues. Yes, because of the covenant, because he screwed up this thing that he had probably been committed to for a long time, and this firm decision that he made. Actually,
no, it wasn't out of guilt that it screwed him up. It wasn't out of guilt. It was actually out of pleasure. It screwed him up because it made him think like, oh, I really like this, and like he didn't really care that much. In fact, he left the church.
So obviously, your example is a slippery slope because by and large that doesn't happen. You're coming from.
I've seen it. I have read about multiple things in every young man's battle.
Multiple things in every young man's battle. So every young man's battle, every man's battle, every young woman's battle. It's this huge franchise of books that's an evangelical institution, and so they're going to have stories that fit their narrative.
Yes, and I've seen it in my life. That's what I'm saying.
You've seen it in your life, absolutely. But what I'm saying is that. In all of the things that I've read and all of my curiosity, just looking up stuff and people telling their stories and looking up stuff, I haven't seen that same clear correlation that you have. I think that you're
with
coming
emotional. Emotionally speaking, I could name at least 5 different circumstances that of sexual relationships.
Billions.
I no, because this is to people of the many people I don't know, like how many people do you know like oh, I know this person's had blah blah like stuff before marriage. Like I only know of a certain amount of people who have done stuff before marriage, and a large
majority of the population. It's the
true.
Vast majority
it's
of the
true.
population.
That's a very good
and
point.
So everyone who has a functioning marriage that works, usually they're actually totally fine even though they had sex before marriage.
Yeah. Well, well, that's another thing that I've been seeing is that just marriages aren't holding up like they used to, and it is because that it used to be a big old standard to wait to marriage. Like that used to be a very common thing, and it's no longer. And we've seen a way higher divorce rate.
Here's the thing, though.
But wait, I should finish what about before.
Okay.
You know, that there's only a certain amount of people who I know had sex before marriage, like that I knew, like, oh, I knew this person had sex before marriage, and I also knew about their emotional life. Usually those two, like, I don't know that I'm not that connected to that many people, like, but I know of at least 5 people in those connections that I know that screwed them up. And I don't want to be among those people. And just from a humanly perspective, it is wise, you know? And even you admit it's wise to wait till marriage, right?
I don't think it's wise to wait till marriage. I said that it's not necessarily bad.
Okay.
Like I'm not thinking, dang it, I've got to get Josiah married before he gets married. That's not my motivation. What my motivation is that what you're telling me is that, okay, so there's this thing. And if you do the thing, you're going to be screwed for life. And I'm thinking, well, okay.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying
you're probably going to be screwed for life.
Not for life. No, but it will affect you emotionally, and it is going to put you in a pit that you don't want to jump into.
Yes. And so when I hear something like this, I think, well, I better actually figure this out, because these are some pretty bold claims that he's making.
Yes.
And so I have done my research. I have looked it up a lot, because I overheard you feeding this propaganda to like Dylan on the bus after tennis and stuff. Like I hear everything, and I'm interested in it. It's a fascinating topic
propaganda.
to me. And yeah, so every time, here's the thing though, man. That's what it is. Every single time I've talked to someone who isn't inundated with all this Christian stuff, they look at me like I'm crazy for telling them things that other people say. Like the whole idea that you can't really, by and large, recover from a breakup with a sexual
you can.
partner.
You certainly can.
That's what you've been.
No, I'm not saying you can't recover. I'm saying it will hurt you emotionally. I'm not saying you can't recover. You can always recover from everything.
But by and large, I say by and large too much.
It's hurtful.
But all in
all, it leaves emotional scars that you don't want.
It's a serious like life altering, like emotional scars, like you said.
It leaves emotional scars. That's why
it's not generally what people think. I've heard just as many people regret not having, maybe not in real life, because like I live in my room. But just in general, because I've looked this stuff up on like when people talk about it. And
they think they're missing out. They think they're missing out, but like
they're not. Oh, so now you know what their emotions are better than they do.
How could they? When you never see, this is one of those things where you never know. Like if you never fall into the pit, like the pit is, you never see it as bad. If you never felt depression, you're like, you can't empathize. You can't understand it. In the same way, you never had sex before marriage. You can't be like, oh, it's good, it's bad. You know, it's one of the, like, for me, I can't comment as much because I haven't had sex before marriage. I can't comment as much because I haven't had sex in marriage. So this is one of those things where I can't make definite claims. I can certainly, from a humanly perspective, like, I definitely think the Bible is true. So I can make claims as off like that, but from a humanly personal perspective here. But like, if they've never seen the effects of it because they've never gone down that road. For example, I've struggled with certain things in the past, and I've gone down certain roads, and coming out of those roads, I'm like, wow, I do not want to ever travel down that road ever again. For sure. And knowing that, you know, when I first started traveling down that road, the road seemed good. It seemed like something that was like not good. I knew it was wrong, but like it was like it was just so like, I don't know.
It felt like a net positive.
It felt like a net positive. That's right. But as it goes on, it just was massive decrease, and I had to fight to get out of the pit. And when you get out of it, you're like, dude, not going back in the pit again. But someone who's entering the pit is like, oh, this is not, you know.
So that goes,
or who hasn't even entered the pit.
That goes against your entire narrative of, so now you have a better idea of what the pit is like, and you don't like it because it's bad now that you're out of the pit.
Right.
So what about not eating the candy?
Well, I would rather have not entered the pit. Okay. I'd rather, because we'll see, it's also, not only is it easier for me to fall back into the pit now, because I'm on the edge of the pit. And, you know, probably my whole life, I'll be somewhere near the edge of the pit. Whereas before, I was farther from the pit. I took many, many steps to walk into the pit. and I will never leave the edge of the pit because of that.
So-
But also I've done, you know, like there are things that I can't go back. I definitely would rather have not entered the pit. Yeah.
That's fair. But what my point is that when I try to gather aggregate information, just like you're trying to gather aggregate information for all, you know, these people that you've talked to, the people that you know, and you're always like, well, this one person, they had sex before marriage and then they died. Like that narrative doesn't seem to be the aggregate narrative to me. And when I tell you that that's my experience in trying to figure it out and looking at it from a scientific perspective, from a humanistic perspective, and you just say, well, those problems aren't real problems. The problems that my people have are real problems. What you're doing is you're assigning people emotions, and you're assigning people emotions that you don't know inherently as well as they do because you're not them.
Okay. I don't know. Okay, fair. I haven't read thousands of internet reports.
I haven't read thousands of internet reports. I'm not that much of a loser.
It's true. I haven't explored this from those things, but from just the personal things around me. I mean, one can only collect, like, you have to make a conclusion based off evidence. You know, scientific method. Mm-hmm. You get your evidence. You make a hypothesis. You get your evidence. You make a conclusion. From my evidence, I have made the conclusion sex before marriage is not wise, even from a humanly perspective, even from a scientific perspective. And this transcends just like chemicals. It's like even, okay, like even let's just like, there's just so many reasons. There's more than just one reason. Like you can obviously find people who are claim to be outliers on these one reasons. But like as a whole,
claim to be outliers. Your
like
people
like even let's talk about
to be outliers.
Okay, let's talk. Okay, that's fair. It seems like okay, but I'm talking about like as with individual issues, like emotionally speaking, where with when I'm talking about like, you know, how it affects you after a breakup and whatnot, how it affects you as like with multiple partners, and then chemically speaking, like disease, for an example, STDs. Yeah. I mean,
no, that's fair.
That's another thing. It's like that. That's another, like, even that's just enough reason to. Yeah.
Well, okay. My point with STDs, or God forbid pregnancy, right, is that you can take calculated measures. You can people do calculated risks all the time. And like I remember you saying that. Did you know that condoms are only 98% effective? First of all. Whenever you say that, know that that's because they did a study. They had 50 women who across a year only had sex when their partner had a condom on, and 2 of them got pregnant. So that means if we actually calculate, if we 50? Do a rough estimate, yeah, they did. It's a study with 50.
That's
98%. Sorry, one of them.
Yeah.
One was 2 out of 100, 1 out of 50.
Wait, that's 94.
Sorry. It's not 90. Is that 94? No, that is whatever. Math. So that means that if you actually calculate it on a per, if you actually calculate it on a per use basis, the number is more like 99.7%, which is already a lot better. And that's if you.
Well, that's not my point, Frank.
Okay, but here's what I am saying is the point. Is that what I said to you is, so like you drove here.
I did.
And you tried, I hope, to be safe while driving. You wore your seatbelt.
I did.
And you followed the rules of the road.
I did.
And you drove smartly, right?
Yes, comrade. Yes.
Even if you do that, though, there's a chance that you're going to get in a car crash and die.
Right.
But you accept
I did take the
risk.
calculated risk.
You took the calculated. People take. So that's the thing with like if you.
But if I could drive here without taking the risk, if I could transport here, why wouldn't you?
The transportation in this metaphor is the sex. So you're wishing.
Okay.
So you're saying, if I could have sex with absolutely no risk of STDs or pregnancy, why wouldn't I? And I think, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Sex and marriage.
Okay. So yeah, that's true.
Well, I mean, you still risk a pregnancy.
You still risk pregnancy, but in some cases it's not a risk.
It's not a risk. Yeah.
So my point is that if we just take the example of, if we're within the context of premarital sex, right? you can take a calculated risk, and people do it all the time. And I don't think that just because you can find a 0.01% chance that it's all going to be a disaster, because, as much as that may be scary, the reality is that that's not how we operate in the world. That's my point with that. Where were we even going?
I think you're going on the right track there.
Yeah, I basically just said the calculated risk thing. So that was, you were saying, and there are many
as you're
examples.
Saying overall, I'm like outlying.
Yeah.
Basically. Okay.
And that's fine. I don't think that you're making, like I said, for the third time now, I don't think that my buddy Josiah is making a bad decision. I just don't necessarily think that not doing what Josiah is doing is a bad decision the way that he would characterize it as.
Okay.
Also, I just want to get this off my chest.
All right. Go for it, big boy.
The primary motivator for the abstinence argument in your case is because it adheres to Christianity.
That's right. The spiritual argument is the greatest reason, one that I haven't talked about yet.
I encourage anyone who thinks that, so it's like the don't eat pork thing in Leviticus, right? Well, that's because of trigonosis and because it's hard to cook. In their time, it was really hard to cook pork so that it would be safe. And so it's considered like pork. It's delicious, but it's considered unclean. And so they don't like it because it has a much higher risk of disease than something like beef.
Okay.
So God, Yahweh, made that a law for a practical reason.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
That the laws, are you talking about Old Testament stuff?
Talking about Old Testament stuff.
Okay, so yes, in the Old Testament, he says, in fact, in the Old Testament, there were things that God made exceptions with that we don't have in the New Testament. In almost every single book of the New Testament, almost every single book, it's mentioned by either Jesus or whoever wrote the books about what God says on sexual immorality, how it's wrong, how it is not for children of God, how it is harmful and it makes God sad. And Jesus even mentions it many times.
That's because they're Jews.
They are, but Jesus established a new covenant, and that covenant is for us too.
But they're adhering to this old law. And what I'm saying is that if
Jesus did not adhere to the old
law,
law,
but they're basing it off of.
Not necessarily. Jesus agreed with the old law, but the new law. In fact, the most of Paul's letters was talking about how the law is dead, and not adhering to it, and how there's a new covenant. The old law is dead, and the new covenant frees us because we no longer have to, because Jesus forgave our sins at the cross. Those sins no longer bind us. We ask God for forgiveness. There's no longer an atonement we need for sins because Jesus was the atonement. We no longer need sacrifice. We like many of these things that were there to keep us clean, right? A lot of this was about cleanliness, but we are clean because of Jesus's blood. And if we try to make ourselves clean through the law, as he said, they call it like self-righteousness with like filthy rags. Which is interpreted in the Greek there, menstrual rags. So it's like offering up to God like menstrual rags and being like, this is good enough. Because
there's nothing dirtier.
Well, actually, but they believed that was it was a very unclean thing. Well, see, in the Old Testament, just from a Jewish contextual perspective, in the Old Testament, they were like they made sure that it was like a really clean process. They made sure to clean this up. Like it was supposed to be they tried to clean themselves up. So it's like offering up like a menstrual rag and being like, oh, this is good enough. Like we don't need your son's blood. Your son died for us. This is good enough. That's like the law. And so what Jesus is saying
I love that one type of blood is unclean and then the other type of blood is what cleans everything.
I know, it is interesting, huh? But it's more like we offer up originally we had to like sacrifices, for example. Yeah. Well, not we, because we weren't alive.
Well, actually, I was. Excuse me.
Frank. Oh,
yes. Back in
Santa
the day,
Claus up in here.
I'm not Santa Claus. That
Moses
bit just didn't work. The camera turned off to signify that wasn't funny.
Are we still on in audio?
No, you're still on in that camera.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That bit went nowhere. God, I need that book on how to be funny.
Okay. What were you? What were you even
We
saying?
were talking about how Jesus Jesus
right,
has a new
right.
covenant.
Right. There's a new covenant. We don't have to follow pork, so pork is not a good
Of course
example.
we
I
don't.
eat pork all the time. I mean, it's not the same. Like the sexual immorality still applies to us because Jesus went through the fields and did all kinds of stuff that the old covenant said not to do. He did like his disciples ate food without washing their hands, and oftentimes the Pharisees would come up and be like, "Yo, bros, why are you doing this?"
Yeah, but if we ignore the Gnostic Gospels, then sexual immorality is not one of the things that Jesus broke apart.
What do you mean?
Right? Because you eat pork, but you don't have sex before marriage. So
Right.
some of the laws
Jesus
carried
said,
over.
right? Because Jesus mentions
Yes.
the laws that carry over are what Jesus it says is in the new covenant, is what is sin. Sin
Yeah.
is different than what atone for sin. Sin and atonement for sin are two different things.
But-
and Jesus
yeah.
lays out in the Old Testament. Like eating pork wasn't necessarily a sin, but it made you unclean, so you couldn't come before God in the temple. And ultimately, the problem with sin is that it separates us from God. So whether it's sin and if you don't atone for sin, if you don't ask, like if you didn't do these things, then the sin still affects you. Does that make sense?
Yes, but is
So
it not obvious?
They're equally bad. But now,
is it not clear from a historical perspective to look at the origins of this whole wait until marriage business and see that it isn't obviously about men wanting their wives to be virgins because they're just like into that?
no, that's disgusting.
Read the freaking Bible, dude.
No, yes, I read the Bible, and there's tons of places where men, honestly, almost every single person in the Bible has at one point screwed up with this.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
But look at the law. Look in Deuteronomy.
Uh-huh.
So, hold on, just you talk.
Okay. I don't know. I read the book of Deuteronomy.
I encourage anyone to take a deep dive into Deuteronomy and check out all of, I believe it's Deuteronomy, and check out how God outlined marriage to work for the covenantal Jews. Right? I may get some details wrong, but more or less, guy wants to marry a girl. They decide to do it. The guy goes up to girl's parents and he gives them a little covenantal gift, right? Of monetary value. Anyway, guy finds out girl's hymen nowhere to be found. There's no evidence of her virginity because that's how they did it back in the day. Parents give the guy a refund for the little covenantal gift, and the woman is punished for lying, or the family lied about the virginity of the woman. This is not about a practical way to have a better marriage. If you look in the way that they describe all the laws about marriage and like who gets stoned in which situation and when adultery happens, obviously it's because for some reason, and you see this throughout culture, I don't get it, but dudes have this weird obsession with their partners being virgins. They want to deflower women. They want to take their virginity. It's like,
That's disgusting.
It's disgusting.
Well,
Why do
okay.
you want to do that? But what I'm saying is that the origin of the abstinence
I
thing,
definitely disagree, and I
Okay,
definitely
why?
think God did not. Let's take the heart of God for an example. Like Jesus, it is culture. It is wrong for men to be stoning a woman for adultery and not the man as well. The man.
That's not what it said in the Old Testament.
That's
So you're talking
not
about-
true. You're wrong. It doesn't say to punish the woman without the man if a man does something
Yes,
wrong.
it does.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, it does.
I have read the book.
I have read the book too.
Okay. Well, I don't know how. Okay, I don't know it by heart, but I know that
neither do I.
God does not. He differentiates in roles for men and women, but punishments are very, very similar, and if not the same, almost always. And it's for men, it's equally wrong. God is not a God who discriminates men versus women, especially in the role with marriage. He says men should stay faithful, women should be faithful. He says that in the Old Testament. He says that in the New Testament. It's very clear.
Yes, but that's because That's because the men wanted ownership of the women. Read the dang Bible. At least now,
I have.
Okay, of course you could. So you could certainly make the argument that Jesus frames these old laws in a different light. Although there are like the inconvenient little like verses in the epistles that are like, wives, submit to your husbands.
The laws are the
women
same.
shall not teach
sin.
men.
As I said, sin stays sin in the New Testament. It's just atonement for sin is different. When you mess up in the Old Testament, you don't have to do the same. Like now, if you have sex before marriage, you don't have to kill a goat.
Yeah.
Like those things are passed away. Those atonement is passed away. We can be close to God. We don't need to do those things to get to the temple, to talk to God, to have a relationship with God.
But the reason
we can have a relationship with God.
The origin of the reason for the marriage faithfulness laws was because men were, for lack of a better term, it's just the male insecurity of wanting ownership of the women.
No, in the minor prophets and major prophets, God talks about sexual immorality a lot among his people, and he describes how it makes him feel. And it says God is disgusted by it. He hates it, and that is the primary motivation. God, when God says something, it hurts him. It hurts God, and that is our motivation. That's their motivation. Well, that should have. I mean, that was how they wrote what should be the motivation, is because we are trying to come before God's feet. We are trying to have a relationship with God. That's the whole purpose of
I
it
think
all.
I know our problem.
Okay.
Is that I don't think God wrote the laws. I think people wrote the laws and ascribed them to a God. Okay. So for me, reading through the Bible, it seemed like reading through, and at least the Old Testament marriage laws, it seems pretty obvious to me that that your wife wasn't your life partner. She was a glorified concubine, and that basically you don't want, and that men didn't want them to be unfaithful, and men didn't want to have to like deal with the fact, oh, she's had multiple partners and whatnot, right? Whereas for you, when God says it and God says his reason for it, you're like, oh, okay, well it's because God says it, and like God has this all-encompassing plan. Time doesn't apply. Whereas I think I look at it from the perspective of God didn't write these laws, people did. Why did they write them, and why do we still like see the residue of these laws in today's society, and what's the actual origin of them? And I would wager that practicality for emotional and mental health was not the reason for the origins of these marriage laws.
Well, practicality is the origin of a lot of both Old Testament and New Testament laws. Definitely, yeah. I mean, like even like in the Old Testament, we could take stuff like, but that's not the point. But like okay, do you want me to give a quick example or no?
I don't know what you're talking about, so go ahead.
All right. Well, like practicality, like when a lot of the laws with being clean saved a lot of them from disease. That
like
even like take circumcision.
Yeah.
But that's not the point. The one problem with saying like that I see the Bible as like, oh, like it has to do with God writing, and you see it from the man's perspective, right? I totally understand. Like we're on the same page. Like yes, yeah, we have different perspectives. I think the problem, I mean, I'm not devaluing what you're saying, but like the problem with what you're saying is that a lot of the Bible says God says blank.
Yeah.
And the New Testament is Jesus says, which is Jesus is God, right? Jesus says blank. Why would God in the Old Testament say describe his emotions and how he feels and why he wants his people to come to him because of sexual immorality among men and women, especially among men? He talks about how much, like, why would a man write that? Why would a man be like, oh dude, like stop sleeping around, like, yeah, it doesn't make sense, because
from my perspective, the God, quote unquote, and the religion evolved over time.
Evolved over time
because
through the translations?
No, not through translations, throughout, because the writings of the Bible span a long times, and some of the books were written before other books, and etc. Right. And so whereas you interpret the Bible as having God be this constant force. And when it seems like there might be some inconsistencies, you have to just account for that and figure out the way in which God is actually saying or trying to achieve the same thing ultimately throughout the book. Whereas if God is the creation of people, then he doesn't have to always be consistent, because why do you expect him to be consistent when we've got like so many hundreds of years of history for a religion and a culture to evolve?
I'm not sure if I understand the question.
That wasn't a question, that was a statement.
Okay, sorry. Well, I see what you're saying of how I see the Bible with evolving. If this were true, I think the Bible, yes, I do think it's consistent. I do think God is consistent. Yes, I think it isn't of evolution. You can read like from the start to the finish. There's certain things that God is so adamant on that he stays so adamant on. He doesn't change. He doesn't shift. It's not like in one book, he's like so focused on one thing, and then another book he's so focused on like he doesn't even care about that other thing. Like it is certainly like even let's just take like sexual immorality. Like from the beginning, from day one, he was like God made man and woman, and like he made marriage. He made these ideas. These like let's take overarching ideas here. God's overarching ideas of how he created everything a certain way, right? He created everything to be good and perfect in a certain way. Now, as it carries on through the Bible, that certain how God wants everything to be stays the same. It doesn't change. It's not like God's like here in one place like, oh, this is okay. He's like it doesn't change. I have read the whole Bible many times, and
I haven't read the whole Bible. You have a more experience reading the Bible than I do. I can't pull out verses that contradict themselves to like make this debate actually cool.
Okay.
What I will say is that I'm telling you that's because you're interpreting it that way. That's what you want to see, and that's what you see.
Okay.
And and for people now, there's no one who doesn't come into it super biased. But for people who want to see fundamental contradictions, they see fundamental contradictions.
Okay. Could you name?
No, that's my
right. There are. Okay, I'll mention one fundamental contradiction, for you. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure, buddy. that a lot of people struggle with, like Josh, is free will versus, predestination, with God being all powerful versus also. Like, and knowing the future versus also giving us a choice. Like, how do those things like interact? Like, logically speaking, these things seem to be contradictions. Mm-hmm. That is a contradiction, it seems. And I don't have, like as you said, I don't have an answer to that. I don't know. But as we said with the scientific method, you make a hypothesis, you find the evidence, you make a conclusion. Who cares about hypothesis at this point? You get the evidence, you make a conclusion, and the consistency of God outweighs the one inconsistency, or the few inconsistencies. And so, as a whole, my conclusion is that God is consistent, he is real, and his way of doing things is sensible, and it's from God and not from man.
Okay. I just the other wouldn't it be just as reasonable though to say that when you have one serious contradiction, the whole thing sort of starts to fall apart?
No, I wouldn't say so, because there's so many things that God could be in contradiction with. There's so many things, and that's a very minor part of God, is like those that little logical thing is a very, very minor piece of the Bible, and the amount of things that could be a contradiction, the things God cares about. There's so many things God cares about, and I none of them contradict the main things that God cares about.
That's I'm telling you, that's based on your interpretation. That's based on the lens with which you read the Bible, which you think this is a book of truths. And maybe eventually, if it says 2 + 2 is 4 in one part, and then it says 2 + 2 is 7 in another part, then you just think, okay, well then it's not truth anymore.
Well, if that were true, then I would have a preference, and many people do actually. I would have a preference definitely over books of the Bible, like not just tone because of tone, but because of like, oh, I need to hear this little thing. I need to hear this little thing, you know. But I have just as much fun reading.
Yeah.
Like me and God, like I learn just as much about God.
God and I, Josiah.
God and I.
God is very angry with your grammatical errors. He's gonna smite you tonight.
God and I, we have just as much fun, like interacting in the minor prophets versus, like, which is like supposed to be like the most ridiculous stuff, like because it's like, you know, God's like, I will smite this city, and then I will go and I will smite this city, and like just it's stuff people doesn't read. But I see God's heart just as strongly in that as in like Ephesians, the New Testament.
That's great. You're allowed to see God's heart wherever you want.
But like, I mean, do you see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying.
I don't know how to articulate this more.
That you think you would think that if the Bible's inconsistent, then it would be compartmentalized,
right?
And that you would adhere to one little part of it, and that you would try to like, no, like, I don't really want to
stay away from there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I don't.
Yeah, but you don't. But that in no way means.
I must admit, I've never read Leviticus though.
Oh,
just
that's too scary.
No, it's just too boring.
Oh. What even is Numbers? Isn't Numbers boring?
I have read Numbers. Numbers is kind of boring. No, there's some parts that are interesting. But.
Because based on the title, you think it's like census data. It's like reading through the 1990 U.S. Census. 73% white.
Me and God are having quality bonding time.
But you're reading this Bible as a truthful, crazy story. And you're seeing it through the lens of you reading this as an act of you having a relationship with a God.
That's correct.
When you don't look at it through that lens, it's a group of books. It's a group of writings that were compiled, and the canon of which books are part of it and which books aren't are, it was disputed, and it was ultimately arrived on, and there are different versions of it, and there are a bunch of things that seem to be like correct for the historical period, but ultimately contradict different ways that we look at history, and it's just not some like consistent, and you can find consistency in it if you want to, but that's if you're looking for it, which you are.
Okay. I honestly, if you miss the point of finding an active God, you're missing the point in general. You can't find God if you don't seek him. You can't, and I mean, there's certain things, and you can try to seek the truth, and you can find God. Frank, you can seek the truth, and you can seek like, is God real or not, and you can find God that way. And sometimes God pursues you even when you don't pursue him. You can find God anyway, because ultimately God finds you first before you find him. That's how awesome God is.
You're setting up a way in which like God finds you, and it's all up to God.
It's not all up to God. That's not true.
So, but
that's not how I see it.
So the way, but
God
the way
certainly leads people to him, and you can choose whether to accept him or not, or whether to reciprocate that.
You're figuring
God
out a way.
God certainly is pursuing you.
You're figuring out a way in which the God way to look at the God perspective is the correct perspective, and you're trying to figure out just like this very broad one size fits all way to do that.
Articulate. How am
you are looking for that's if you were my choir director. I'd be like, God is I
don't see how I'm doing that.
What was I? What were you even saying? So you were saying that you can find God through truth, or God can find you as like it's all part of.
But I mean, this is a rabbit hole to like.
Yeah.
That,
what was
that
so,
God's
like,
love?
How does that?
If it's not a relationship, if it's not an active seeking, if it has nothing to do with relationship, you're right. It's just books. Yeah. It's just books that don't matter. You can burn Bibles, and you're not a Satanist. It doesn't matter. I used my Bible once.
As kindling.
No,
that is awesome.
No, actually, I wasn't the Bible. I was about to.
It was the Quran, wasn't it?
No, but I used actually every young man's battle.
Oh.
And the gay chapter.
I'm
just kidding. I tried to find it. No, I ripped out the intro and the conclusion. The workbook. But like, if it's not an active relationship, yeah, it's a bunch of books in history that don't matter at all. If it's not an active relationship,
I think it
people
does
are
matter.
wasting their time, dog. Like
it's certain. No. It certainly does matter to read the Bible, no matter who you are, because it's the biggest religion in the world,
and it's a very credible, probably the most. It goes back super long time ago.
No, it's not the most credible piece of historical book for that.
It definitely is, actually.
It's not.
It's the most credible historical document that from ancient times. Yeah.
You're comparing it to basically non-documents, and you're not even. It's not.
It is. You can research it. I've done plenty of resureach on this. This is one of those things that I've done a lot of research on.
New Testament is my wheelhouse for Bible historicity.
Okay.
But the Bible is not, by and large, often considered a source for figuring things out. I said by and large again, didn't I?
Actually, all the nations mentioned in the Old Testament of like the
Amorites,
Canaanites, we found like those civilizations.
7 tribes of Israel. That's 7 tribes of Israel. I am having a good brain day.
That black tea,
the number of Israel tribes. If you just look it up, it's generally historians agree that the lost tribes of Israel just never existed, and that the complexity and the vastness of the empire of Israel that the Old Testament describes didn't exist.
That's definitely not what I've read.
I don't have a backing up for that, but that's the general scientific consensus.
That the Old Testament has mentioned, like in every book of the Old Testament, they talk about the things that are going around, happening around them, because these are people back then who are writing about it. Obviously, they're talking about current stuff, like for them, and that kind of stuff. Like I read in my history textbooks, like about the Assyrians, about the Babylonians, about these different empires that come up, like everything. It's extremely credible. You can research it, but that's not the point. Viewer, if you'd like to research it, you can.
Yes.
We both commend you to research it, or ask that. That's probably a good
for
point.
you. Round of applause. Yeah,
good job for those who research. But as I said, that's the point is that it's about love. If it's not about as Brother Lawrence from the Catholic Church once said, which I don't really want to get into that, but he was a great monk, and he said this. He said, oftentimes people tried to find God only in books, but you're looking at a copy when the original is right there in front of you, and that's not verbatim, but the original. God is, we assume God is real, which I certainly believe he is real. He can be in our hearts. He can be in the world. He influences things. You can talk to him. There's all kinds of things like I've seen miracles. I've done miracles.
You have?
I have.
Did you make apparitions and stuff and do
No.
You didn't walk on water?
I prayed for things that are ridiculous that have happened.
That's because ridiculous things happen all the time. It's part of the nature of tons and tons of stuff happening all the time.
What was I saying? Oh yeah, this is a relationship. It is something that is not just about the copies of the Bible. The Bible helps me understand the real thing, and the real thing is what it's about.
Would I be inaccurate in characterizing your position as believing in God has improved my life, and my relationship with God as I perceive it has improved my life? Thus, there's truth in it?
It has improved my life a lot, and sometimes in ways that are not intuitive. And so I think there's some weight in that. Yeah. Okay. Why not?
So, but that's all. I'm saying. What was I gonna say? What I was gonna say is that's all well. Frick. That's all well and good. If you believe that God is real. But I think that oftentimes it comes head to head when we're arguing about two different things, because ultimately our assumptions are very different when we talk about things in the Bible.
Well, the difference is I'm put on a place where you can test me. I'm claiming that there is a God, and therefore he's a God that can be tested. And so I challenge you, Frank, and I challenge the viewer.
Yes, viewer. I can't see. You can't see me.
Forgive us, viewer, if we
Viewer,
are having some...
listen up.
I challenge you to read the Bible, and I would say the book of John is a good place to start. Read the Bible. The Gospel of John. That's correct.
Okay.
Read it for 30 days. It doesn't have to be very long. Let's just say 5 minutes.
If you want to cancel your free trial, then
pay for then call
but
online.
You won't want to cancel your free trial of the Bible after 30 days.
You just read your Bible for 5 minutes in the book of John. If that's minimum, just to set a timer for 5 minutes. Do it for 30 days, and then if you don't feel like there's something in it, then just move on with your life, whatever. But like I suggest just doing that, because as we pursue God, it says in the Bible, God will pursue us. So if we truly believe that Jesus Christ was willing to die on a cross, so that die the most painful death because he wants us to know him, then that means that if we even try to get to know him, he is searching us more than we are searching him. So we should find him. So seek God, and I suggest, well, the Bible says, taste and see that the Lord is good. So look into it, and just see for yourself. See if it's good or not. We're on a place to be tested. Christians are all on a place to be tested.
Absolutely.
Yes. So
go ahead, read your 5 minutes of the Gospel of John and learn about the Lamb of God and all the stuff that John said. And with that, we just did 2 hours. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Comrade.
Thank you, comrade.
And what I also invite you to do is take 5 minutes a day to get through the Communist Manifesto.
Yes, comrade.
This is better than Gospel of John. Gospel of Marx, comrade.
The Gospel of Marx.
And yeah, I'm going to try to do this every Friday. We're going to have cool guests every time. And if they're not cool, then you can get your money back. And with that, we must sign off.
So